So, have you ever tried to read the Bible from beginning to end? Anybody here tried to do that? People have tried to do that? And it can be tough, right? There are some pretty dry patches in the Bible. And most of the time when we talk about the tough to read passages, we say, oh, well, Leviticus, that's really hard. But the truth is, you don't even need to wait till you get to Leviticus, till you start getting some of the dry stuff. Like these genealogies, these lists of ancestors. Genesis 5. Way back in Genesis 5, you got, this is the record of Adam's descendants. Adam begot Seth. Seth begot Enosh. Enosh begot Kenan. And, you're sitting there reading your Bible, and the next thing you know, you wake up, it's 2 in the morning, you're sprawled out across your kitchen table because it was just a little too boring. Genealogies are not very interesting to us as modern people. But to the people who first read the Bible, this was like a combination of Time magazine and People magazine. This was like news and interesting, crazy facts about people's lives. Genealogies, they showed how people were connected and how everyone fit into that big story of God's redemption of the world, of God's action to bless everybody. So there's genealogies in both Matthew's Gospel and in Luke's Gospel. And Brian McLaren reminds us that although these are two very different genealogies, they have a bunch of different names, and they start in different places, they're the same in two very important ways. First, both of them have Abraham in them. And that's crucial because that's to remind us a theme that we've been repeating a lot as we move through the Bible, that God, through Abraham, doesn't just bless Abraham and his descendants, right? The blessing isn't just that Abraham gets blessed with descendants and land and everything is good for them, but they are blessed in order to be a blessing for all the people of the earth. That blessing goes out to all the nations, to every person on the planet. And that Jesus, as part of that heritage, is going to be the way that blessing gets translated into the rest of the world. And second, they both say that Jesus was a descendant of King David. And of course, that brings back the memories of the glory days of Israel, right? The good old days when David was king, when everybody had enough to eat, when the borders were secure, when there weren't any enemies oppressing us. It was fantastic back then. And it also brings to mind the promise that a king like David would come to set people free in a new way, and that Jesus would be the one to do that. So apart from these similarities and a bunch of other names of obscure people on both lists, the two lists kind of make different points. Actually, Elizabeth brought this up. In Luke's Gospel, it starts in the recent past. It starts with Joseph and then Joseph's father and all the way back, but then goes all the way back to Adam. It goes back to son of Seth, son of Adam, son of God. And that's a little surprising, isn't it? Son of Adam, son of God. Because we tend to think of Jesus as the Son of God. Now, Jesus is the one who came in the flesh, being the first earthly Son of God. But this text says, well, really, Adam was the Son of God. Adam was made in God's image. Adam was made to reflect God's glory on the earth. And now, Jesus comes to be a new Adam. In fact, St. Paul in his letter to the Romans uses that phrase, that Jesus is the new Adam, a new beginning for humanity, a new beginning for all of us. That as we come to know Jesus and to trust Jesus, it's the possibility for a new start for all of us and for all the people of the earth. Matthew's genealogy, which we read today, has a little bit of a different focus. It starts with Abraham. Again, to remind us that in Jesus, God is going to bless all the people of the world and bring even the outsiders into God's family. But the most surprising thing about this genealogy is that Matthew includes 5 women. Because including women in the genealogy back in those days just wasn't done. Okay, now here's the warning. From here on, the sermon is PG-13, okay? So, careful. If you have small children, you may have questions in the car on the way home. Because this story is a real story. It's not prettified. It's not sanitized. It's life. And sometimes life is crazy. So the ancestor list generally is focused on men, but Matthew includes women, and it's fascinating the women that he does include. So first, there is Tamar. Now, the story of Tamar is one that you don't hear in Sunday morning worship, because Tamar was married to one of Judah's sons. Okay? So Tamar marries Judah's son, and Judah's son dies. So the tradition in Israel at that point is if a man dies and he hasn't left his wife any children, then the next brother from that man's family would marry the woman in order to raise up children for his brother. So Onan, another one of Judah's sons, marries Tamar. And Onan says, you know what? My brother, he died. I don't know about this lady. I think she's kind of dangerous. I'm not going in there to sleep with her. And God is displeased with Onan's disobedience to God's law to go in and raise up a descendant for his brother. And so Onan gets struck dead too. And now Judah is like, I am not giving this woman any more of my sons. Obviously she's bad luck, so not going to happen. Problem is this leaves Tamar in a very vulnerable position, right? It's not like she could just go and get a job. It didn't work that way in ancient Israel. She can't just go and get a job in an office someplace. She's left without any means of support. And she's trying to figure out, what am I going to do? So she decides, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to dress up like a hooker. So she dresses up like a hooker, sits by the side of the road, and Judah comes down the road and says, how much? And she says, 1 young goat. And he says, I left my wallet at home. Can I give you my staff as a guarantee that I'll come back and pay? And she says, sure, no problem. That'll work. And so, I'll not speak any more clearly than that. Services are exchanged for the staff, and Judah goes home to go get the payment, comes back, and Tamar has vanished. So 8 months later, Tamar is walking around with a big belly. And the people in Judah's clan are saying, hey, you know, your daughter-in-law, she's been messing around. And you know what we do to people that mess around? Let's get some big rocks and take her outside of town and throw big rocks at her head until she's gone. Because that's the way we roll around here. And so they bring her before Judah, and Judah says, what do you mean by this? You're disgracing the family, you're disgracing me. And Tamar says, by the way, the guy that got me pregnant, this is his staff. Oopsie. And Judah says, you know what? You are more righteous than I am. You are more concerned about doing what God wants than I am. And I'm sorry. Welcome back to the family. Now, that's really not the story that you tell when you're saying, well, my ancestors are, right? That's not the story that you tell. And it's pretty much the same, because it only gets worse, I have to tell you. Because Rahab, the next one, she really is a hooker. She doesn't just dress up like one for one time, but she really is a prostitute. And she's the one that helps the spies when they're spying out the Jericho, and she helps them out, and she joins the people of Israel and becomes an ancestor of King David, and eventually of Jesus. Ruth, another Gentile. Matthew's making the point, look, this is not just about the good people, the people that are part of our family. Because Ruth, too, you know, when I say, oh, Ruth, oh, that's just such a lovely story, and how Ruth supports Naomi, and it's so wholesome. Until you get to the part where Ruth goes into Boaz while he's asleep and uncovers his feet. His feet. They're not really talking about his feet. So there's a little little risque action happening there. But, you know, the story is what the story is. It's not sanitized. And the last one is the wife of Uriah the Hittite. And again, if you want to, you know, sanitize your family line, you know, to say, okay, well, you would just use her name. Maybe somebody would miss it, Bathsheba, you know, and you know, Bathsheba, you know, David was the father of Solomon by Bathsheba. But Matthew wants to make very, very sure that everybody remembers how bad this story is. Now, we're not going to say Bathsheba, we're going to say the wife of Uriah the Hittite. We're going to remind everybody that what happened was that David committed adultery with another man's wife and then had him killed to try to cover it up. Yes, that's right, King David, the man after God's own heart. It's pretty shocking, isn't it? I mean, this is shocking stuff. Matthew tells us all this because he wants us to know that Jesus was born into the same messy world that we're born into. The same world where things are not clear-cut. Where the King David, who is the man after God's own heart and does so much good, he also did something really horrible and was eventually forgiven for it. But that's the way the real world is. The real world is a broken place where God comes in and redeems the brokenness, where God comes in and heals the hurt, where God uses all kinds of people to advance God's blessing in the world. And so when Jesus is born, when Jesus is finally born, the first people to show up to welcome the newborn king, besides Mary and Joseph, are a bunch of shepherds. And you've probably heard this before. Shepherds were not particularly esteemed people at that time. They had to spend time with the animals out in the fields. They couldn't go to worship regularly. They were seen as untrustworthy, kind of ritually unclean, not the kind of guys you would want your daughter to date, period. But they show up. They're the ones that welcome Jesus into the world because God is making it clear the poor, the disenfranchised, the people that we think don't matter, they're the people that God is using to bring blessing. And remember, that same King David, when Samuel the prophet came to pick him to be the king, they had some trouble finding him because he was the youngest son, the son that they thought was never going to amount to anything. So he was out in the field taking care of sheep. God uses the vulnerable people. I learned that in our context, in our modern context, last Saturday. I went to a funeral for a homeless guy that I knew. And it was amazing to see the people that stood up to say how Kevin had been a blessing in their lives. There was a school principal, there was a couple different pastors, there were other people from the community. We just talked about how this guy had a kindness to him that really spoke to people, that just affected people, that helped people glimpse a bit of goodness in the world. And even though he was a very broken person, very broken, very sad life, but still, even there, God's light shined through. It's the same with us. There are days where you might feel that you're broken. There are days where you might feel that you don't have anything left to give. But it's precisely in that place where God will meet you and bless you so that you can be a blessing. Thanks be to God.